Hello everyone. In this brief video, we're going to talk about name signs. One aspect of deaf culture that is valued is the use of personal name signs. Name signs are used to identify persons instead of fingerspelling their name, which many times can be tedious. Unlike names that are used in spoken languages, where most people share many of the same conventional names, name signs in American Sign Language are unique to each individual. There are no specific name signs in ASL for common English names. Instead, name signs are individualized for each person. In the deaf community, name signs are used in place of spelling out a whole name. These signs are used to identify a person, kind of like using a nickname. Name signs are used for introductions and to refer to that person. But in conversation, references to people that are present are made just by indexing or pointing or gesturing towards that person. A deaf person should assign you a name sign. A very typical method is to take the first letter of your name and put it in a location of a sign that means something that you do. A person cannot give himself a name sign. Someone needs to come up with a name sign for an individual. There are two basic types of name signs that are descriptive and those that use a handshape from the signed alphabet. Let's talk about descriptive name signs first. Descriptive name signs tell you something about a person, and they can be based on something about the person's physical attributes, their personality, their hobbies, or even past experiences. So a tall, small, or thin person might have a name sign with that characteristic. One person may have several name signs, each one given by a different group within the community. If the individual, for example, is a supervisor at work, or a really lousy poker player, and a loving father at home, he may have three name signs to reflect those three different characteristics. Or they may just have the same name sign in all three. Or in the English language, a person has a first, middle, and last name. In Sign Language, it's just a one-word unit. The name sign will not change its form into a shorter version, like, for example, Robert to Bob or Rob. Sign names using a letter from the alphabet are called arbitrary name signs. They are more commonly used than descriptive name signs, and they can contain information about a person's family or their heritage. Arbitrary or random name signs do not describe anything about the person, but instead they follow the linguistic conventions for name signs. A new kind of name sign is showing up in the community, probably due to hearing adults increasing in numbers that are learning sign language as a second language. It's a blend of non-traditional name signs are a blend of arbitrary and descriptive name signs. An example is a handshape S that might be used to represent the first letter of the person's name placed next to the I. Twisting the wrist up and down to represent that the person winks a lot. If it was descriptive, it would not use the alphabetical handshape. But if that name sign was arbitrary, the location would not be at the eye, but at the nearest acceptable location, or the temple. There's an unwritten rule in the deaf culture that only deaf and hard of hearing persons can give individuals name signs. It is taboo for a hearing person to give a name sign. Some argue that hearing ASL teachers that can give name signs for use in class only. The problem with this practice, though, is that students do tend to use those name signs outside of class, which can be a bad thing when a member of the deaf community hears that a hearing person is giving out name signs. So therefore, in our class, we will not be using name signs. One exception to this cultural norm is in the case of a deaf or hard of hearing person giving name signs, is when a hearing parent who's learning ASL, if they have deaf children, they can give their deaf child a name sign. Both descriptive and arbitrary name signs tend to incorporate the first letter of a person's first and or last name. To avoid confusion, name signs in general are not identical to already existing word signs, unless a person's name is also a common word. For example, an individual with the last name of Brown might be given the sign for brown, the color brown, as a name sign. However, deaf people tend to try to avoid giving name signs that can be easily misunderstood because they look like similar signs. Unlike name signs in spoken languages, which are used to get a person's attention when addressing the person directly, in American Sign Language, the waving of the hand vertically with the palm oriented downward is used to get a person's attention. So there is no need to sign a person's name when you're directly signing that to that person. So ASL has evolved so that signers generally do not use a person's name sign when signing directly to that person. Name signs are only used when talking to other people about an individual. This characteristic of the language enables some people in the deaf community to go years without learning others' names while still being able to talk to them. Not all deaf people have name signs. Some prefer to have their names fingerspelled. People still fingerspell their names when meeting each other for the first time, even if they do have name signs. When meeting a new person, if a person has a name sign, he or she will show the name sign after fingerspelling their name. Often if the sign looks interesting or is a descriptive name sign, the person is asked to explain how and why they received that name sign. Short names such as those with 4 letters or less are often just fingerspelled instead of the person receiving a name sign. A deaf person usually will not have a name sign if they are the only deaf person in the community. The same is true for some deaf children born to hearing parents, if those parents have not given their child a name sign. These deaf children, in those cases, do not get a name sign until they are around other deaf individuals. Interesting thing about name signs is that once the name sign is conferred and made known to the public, it's too late to change it. And that person will continue to be referred to by that name sign. It is possible to change a name sign, though, if social conditions require it. For example, if someone moves into town and finds a person living there with an identical name sign, then the newcomer would have to change their name sign. It's also common for the elder or the person that has had the name sign longer to keep it. If a deaf and hearing person have the same name sign, the hearing person would be expected to change their name sign. You can change a name sign